We got two musical geniuses on the line right now, and we're gonna have a wonderful conversation. Um, my name is Warren Jones, co-founder of Toasted Life. We are a lifestyle, entertainment, lifestyle, and leisure brand that produces and curates experiences for people of color. Community building platform, and our moniker is Toast to Life, and we celebrate life in a big way every day. And today we're going to be celebrating musical healing and creative leadership through our initiative called the 40 series. We started this about 3 years ago, meant to be an intimate in-person event, but obviously given the times, we've decided to bring this to an online presence to share it more broadly, to connect people like yourselves to really interesting thought leaders like Juan and Nana, creatives and entrepreneurs and innovators that are doing really dope things. So we wanted to have a conversation around, obviously just us being isolated. Music is such an important piece that unites people, that brings countries together, breaks boundaries, all types of things. And, it's needed way more than ever right now. So we wanted to kind of talk about the space that that music can play during this time, and really showcase how creators and innovators and artists can like use their craft to also make impact in their communities and also heal within themselves. So not going to take up too much time, but I want to pass the mic over to Juan. Before I do that, we got your questions. We're going to have a conversation for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we're going to kick to Q&A. And you guys can put your questions in the Q&A box or the chat, and then we've also received your questions when you registered. So we'll be layering that into the discussion as well. And then last but not least, there is a survey at the end of this that will pop up. So please fill that out so that we can continue to improve. But without further ado, Juan G, Nana, take it away.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Nana, you and I have met a few times, and I really always appreciate being able to have a conversation with you.
Likewise, man. It's great, bro. I feel like every time we talk, it already just turns into like a TED Talk, bro. Every single time.
Well, I don't know what it is, but it's definitely something that's super enjoyable for me, and so I'm looking forward to being able to have that one more time with you. So.
Absolutely.
First off, I wanted to sort of shout out the sponsors of this event and of this conversation, and so our sponsors are Martell, and in honor of them, I wanted to raise our glass and show that I decided to make a tropical drink. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's got juices and it tastes really good for the sun. So
nice.
You're drinking it straight, it looks like.
Yeah, pretty much.
Good for you. One of the pillars in their messaging is about being unapologetic. And so in that spirit, I wanted to kick off this conversation by asking you, what is it that you feel you're unapologetic about? And then how has being unapologetic in your career, how has that played out? So start off the conversation with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the journey to music for me has been very interesting. The journey to artistry, especially just being born as a Ghanaian, as a first generation African. I think a lot of people, have similar experiences. If you're born to an immigrant, you kind of have the similar experience of your parents putting that pressure on you to either be like a doctor, to be a lawyer, or to be, disowned from the family, if you will. And so for a lot of my life, I was planning on being a doctor, and I was pre-med. Studying science, I've always loved, specifically as it relates to me personally, right? Like I have sickle cell disease. So when I was young, coming up in Philly, I'd be, going to, work at the children's hospitals and being in the laboratories and, in there, like, separating plasma, so on and so forth. And that was like one side, of my life. And I think another side of my life that was happening simultaneously was my creative, self, and the idea of my creative expression, right? It's like, by day I'm, taking bio and chemistry, and then by night, I'm at UPenn with like the Philly homies coming over, till 5 a.m, just working on music. And so in a lot of ways, it was like two different lives, kind of that were just, juxtaposed to each other. And there was no real synergy, and I think my moment of being unapologetic about these two halves of myself was actually when my brother passed from sickle cell disease. My brother is Kwame. He passed a couple years, after I graduated from college. And I think we have this idea, in the Western world that death is people mourn death, right? We mourn death. We talk about death like it's a negative thing. We talk about death like it's an ultimate failure, right? And I think, as we all know, energy, the first law of thermodynamics, energy never dies, right? Energy is only transformed from one place to another. And so for me, I think in Kwame passing, the thing that he left with me was a lot of his passion. He was a musician as well. He was super unapologetic. He was that little scrawny guy that, if you got a group of homies that are out, he's that first guy that's going to try to get in a fight with somebody else because he knows he's got backup, and just talks reckless. And, he's completely that guy, but yeah, absolutely. And he had a fearlessness, and I think a courage, for a little guy that I'm like, man, that energy I feel like was transferred to me. And so for me, in a lot of ways, I think when I had these two halves of my life that never felt resolved with each other, when he passed, it felt like those two things became one, right? I realized that music actually is the medicine, and medicine actually is the music, right? And I think at that moment, that transformation that I had made me be super unapologetic about just my purpose, here on earth. And it's really to walk that line of music and medicine.
Well, respect to Kwame, but I'm glad to see that you were able to kind of come away with that from that experience with something that motivated you. To piggyback on something that you said, which is that energy never dies, it just kind of transfers. We're in this conversation because we're looking to music as a form of healing for us. But we know that we, as creatives, we're also trying to find healing within ourselves in order to put work out there and to create for others to enjoy. And so how do you see, to really kind of dive into this conversation, how do you see yourself or your peers transferring that energy that they were applying to, say, the stage, applying to, efforts to produce music for certain platforms or mediums, and now finding themselves in this virtual space?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting time. I think that, artists it's interesting to just see how different artists are kind of dealing with the times, right? I think you have different artists that just have no clue, of how to engage, really in this moment, and I think, which is understandable. I think for a lot of people, they're just thrown off. We're constantly in this chapter of having to abandon our old ways of being. Right. And so I think, beyond art, there are a lot of people that are just looking for a sense of direction, looking for a sense of purpose, looking for clarity, and so I think there's a lot of people that are in that space that are just figuring it out. And then there's other artists, that I think that are almost like, it's funny, man, it's just a range. There's some people that I feel like are almost in denial. You'll see certain artists that they're just taking the photos of themselves on IG, just doing the poses. The only difference is they got a mask on this time. Right. And not really speaking to the times, and I think that, again, to each his own. I think there are other artists that are embracing this moment and finding new and interesting ways to engage with people. Right. And I think for me, when it comes to art, when it comes to the power of art, when it comes to the role that art plays in the world, is that it actually starts with self. It's like we can't really have the impact that we want for the communities that we're a part of if we don't actually start within ourselves, right? And I think that's, and we got to be specific about what that means, right? Like, I think here in the West, we have a culture of isolationism already, right? Like, we have a culture of, not necessarily always being close to the people that are immediately around you, right? And I think even the virtual space, in that kind of context, has made it even more possible to alienate ourselves from people, right? And I think what we're realizing now, that we don't have the option of going out and having a physical interaction with people. Now our interactions are being, kind of forced, if you will, online. It just changes the dynamic, right? And so there's a deep end on both sides, right? I think there are people that, right now, everything's on the gram, right? Everything's on the gram, everything's on YouTube, everyone is streaming. And, people that don't typically stream. And so now you get this over proliferation, right, of people just online all day long with different events or different ideas. And some stuff that's really, really dope, right? Like we've seen some dope cultural moments just with like either DJs, you know, being online or seeing different artists, you know, and seeing, you know, the Babyface versus the Teddy Rileys and the Versus series. There's a lot of great stuff happening.
Even
and then
cut you off, but even in that
yeah,
example, you saw the pitfalls of really kind of that we're faced with having to learn new technology on the fly, right?
exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's a whole different than the sound check,
Yeah.
you know, when it comes to to being online,
Yeah.
you know. And so, you know, so I think, you know, for some people it's been something new to embrace. I think there are actually people that have been on it for a minute though, right? That are actually, you know, they're like, wait, this is kind of been my normal, you know. And then I think, you know, even culturally we've seen that, right? Like outside of the States, you know, if you look at different countries like in actually various countries in Asia, it was common to actually have artists that were actually virtual artists that were doing tours and doing shows, and they're not even real people. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting to kind of just see culturally how different people are dealing with it. Some people that are behind the digital divide, some people that are ahead of it. But again, I think all of it starts with self, because the real question one has to ask is, what is my voice going to be in this current conversation?
Yeah,
right? Like it always starts with self.
that's a really good point. I mean, honestly, I've been asking myself as I kind of continue doing the work that I do for Pandora, but then also as a creative on my own time, it's like, how do I best represent the work that I want to do without sort of falling victim to the pressures of what I feel like are the instantaneous pressures of like Instagram going live and, you know, having to kind of compete with everyone that's around you. It almost feels like I'm adding to noise sometimes in that, and I'm not really kind of producing what I want to produce.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point, bro. I mean, and to be honest, it's like, I've been thinking about that a lot, you know, on the idea of noise, right? Like there's just a lot of noise, bro. There's just a lot of noise in the world right now. And, you know, I think in a lot of ways, I look at noise and I look at silence, obviously in a certain kind of lens, you know, just me being a producer and someone that enjoys just the science of sound, right? When I think about noise, you know, I think about like other areas of time. Like let's talk about like when producers were complaining about how easy it was to make music, right? Like when different programs came out, like GarageBand, right? And the idea of like, man, you got casual guys that are just on here just making music, or people that are putting up whack stuff on YouTube or whatever it is, and all these platforms kind of democratizing the creation of music. And what you get is an over proliferation of mediocrity, right? Like, and to a degree, you know, a lot of people, at least in my field, would complain. It'd be like, man, like, you know, it's just too easy for other people to make music now. It's too easy for someone to just learn how to DJ over the weekend. Oh, you a DJ now? That's the whole thing. But for me, I actually welcome it. I enjoy it. For me, I look at it as like, when there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of mediocre noise, right? It actually creates an opportunity for you that for as of contribute to the conversation, they just set the stage for you. So when all these people are now distracted by all this different noise, they're going to eventually start looking for something that cuts through the noise, right? And if you're in tune with yourself, if you're in tune with what you're here for, your voice can be the thing that actually cuts through, you know? So I just, for me, I think the noise thing is understanding that actually this is an opportunity is really, really key. I also think being mindful, when you talk about self, right? I think being mindful of what are the things, we're always talking about output as a creative, my output, my output, my output. Your output is dependent on your input, right? We all know that. And so we, in the same way we talk about diet, right? We'll be so specific about our diets, right? It's like, you know, we'll talk about being vegan, we'll talk about being on a keto diet or this, that, and the third. You know what I'm saying? I like, for me, I'm like, everything is our diet, right? Like the people that we have conversations with is a part of our diet. The books that we read, the articles that we read, the images that we see, you know, the music that we hear, the sound that we hear, all of these things are a part of our diet. And so what's going to come out of you creatively as an artist is going to be completely indicative of what you've been putting into yourself. And so in a time where there's just so much noise, sometimes it's beneficial to be very, very selective about what noise comes in. Sometimes it makes sense to be silent. Sometimes it makes sense to be in the middle of the noise so you can actually have a craving for like, I just want silence, I want peace. you know? And so I think, you know, the idea of the artist is to go on the journey of exploring, having a mastery of self within all of the noise. And that way producing a clarity of like, okay, what do I want to actually contribute?
100%. I mean, you know, that leads me to a point. I mean, to what you're to just kind of like touch on what you just said. I mean, the cream will rise to the top, and obviously, like, we have to think about how we're kind of, you know, what we're taking in and how what we're putting out in the process is so key to me, because I mean, this is a time when I'm sort of hypersensitive to everything that's going on around me, and at the same time, I'm kind of numb because of all the information that's coming at the same time, and so I may be kind of not be able to stay to be focused and to be present when this energy kind of comes to me. I've been thinking a lot about kind of reimagining the audience that we have as creatives, and thinking about how we create and cultivate community. And what does that mean? You know, someone had sent in a question from through Toasted Life, talking about like, what are artists gonna do now that we're seeing, you know, the platforms that we have to perform being shut down indefinitely, right? We're talking about like end of the year or even into 2021. Los Angeles is talking about, you know, Q3 of 21. So I mean, we're talking about like October, November. And how do we, or I don't know, I mean, I know you may not have the answer, but have you thought about, or your peers, have you seen your peers think about what it is to reimagine your audience now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not gonna paint this with rose-colored glasses, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's gonna be certain artists that were and creatives that were, you know, were on, you know, making progress in their careers, and because of this moment, never figure it out, and you never hear from them again. That's just a reality. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a real reality that we just gotta accept. And I think also, you know, on the flip side of that, this is going to be a new opportunity for other artists that might not have necessarily been heard, you know, or have, you know, been able to adapt, right? Like, there's a lot we can learn from nature in this moment, right? Like, nature is never trying to be a dominant force and exert its power over everything that it comes across, right? Nature has always been something that has learned how to adapt under any conditions, right? And so I think in learning that and studying that within nature, it's like, that's also what these times call for, right? It's like, how do you adapt? How do you adapt right now to your community, to what you consider to be your community, right? And to be honest, sometimes you might realize that your way of being active and your way of being in the conversation might not even necessarily be through writing a song. It might not necessarily be through DJing or producing a beat. There might be some other call to action for you right now. And it's actually, what I've also learned is that sometimes it's great to embrace that. You know what I mean? Like, there's always this fear of like, man, like creative blocks and what should I say? Or like, or, you know, not knowing what to say, or having so many things that you want to say that you don't even have clarity in what you're speaking, right? Because you're just overwhelmed with ideas and so on and so forth. And so, you know, for me, I think in that circumstance, you know, having the ability to be like, I'm going to adapt. Maybe there's actually a new way that I haven't been thinking about. Maybe there's a side of my artistry that I haven't been honoring. Maybe there's a side of my voice that I haven't been giving enough time of day, you know? And the crazy thing is that, again, I think it starts with self, right? And so whenever, as long as you're doing that in a way where you're truly searching for the root of your contribution to the world, the medium in which it comes out doesn't really matter. That medium, you might have started off as a musician. This might be a moment that you realized you're actually great at comedy. This might be a moment that as a musician, you've realized you're really great as an on-camera personality. Right. This might be a time where you realize, oh, as a musician, I just need to dance for my own therapy. And maybe actually people, you wind up finding out that people actually enjoy watching you dance. Like, the form, the vessel, the way in which your contribution to society comes out is actually less important than you being in tune with what is that purpose to begin with at the core. And the beauty is that I think that actually, and you finding that and not trying to chase audiences find you, because right now what's going to resonate most with people is when people in a state of where people are just over consumed and over, like, there's just a lot of noise. When you see somebody that is just so clearly standing inside of their purpose, whatever it is, You know what I mean? Like whatever it is, that could be and honestly in a yin and a yang way. People looking at Trump like Trump is crazy. Trump is, like we've talked about, Trump is living in his purpose. That's actually his purpose. In fact, he is gloriously living in his purpose right now. You know what I'm saying? So wherever you fall, people are going to pay attention when someone is standing in exactly who they are. And that is going to attract whatever audience it's meant to attract. And so instead of chasing audiences, chase that thing within yourself and it comes to you.
You know, such a great point. I mean, think about the idea of like how we measure audiences in the past and how we think about an audience by sheer numbers, right? As opposed to people who actually engage and who actually sort of come to us and really are receptive to the message that we have.
Absolutely.
I thought about how an audience looks like. I think of the example that I heard Ryan Leslie talk about. You know, Ryan Leslie was thought of somebody who dropped off the face of the earth, but in reality, he was behind. He just decided not to participate in the same old music industry tricks and decided to just focus on his audience and cultivated his audience first out of an email list. Decided that that wasn't personal enough and decided to then move on to like phone numbers and texts.
Yeah.
He's talking about, he's like, I'm moving 100,000 units with no promotion, with no help, with no dividing the pie up with different distributors and labels, but because I have a hardcore engaged audience.
Exactly. And that, that's a great motto. I think another great motto that I've loved is Tyler. You know what I mean? As someone that's been able to create, his own apps. Where, I mean, these are artists. Another example of that is Tech Nine. Who is like, it's interesting when you study him. We actually sat down with him because I was like, that people got to understand. People are always looking at the Jay-Z's and the Diddy's, and these are guys that always wind up on the Forbes list. But it's crazy to always see Tech Nine always on the same Forbes list, and yet we don't even talk about him in the same kind of way. And so we had to sit down and just understand and be like, yo, like, what is your approach, to how you've navigated this industry and been able to still have this amount of success. And, one of the things he talked about was he's of a super serve model, right? It's like, how do I actually super serve my audience, right? And go above and beyond for the people that are here for me, And so a lot of these guys are creating their companies. They're creating their own merch companies. This man was brilliant. I mean, he created his own distribution. He created his own marketing. He was printing all his merchandise on site, just purchased a bunch of land and literally has this like independent operation and has built this core fan base where like they love him. And they, and he told us this one trick that he did where even in terms of getting to like, because this guy fills up stadiums, right? I didn't know until I went and I was like, this is amazing. And one of the things that he did is he knew his audience so well and he knew he could fill up that stadium. So when he went to go approach them about doing a show there, they didn't know who he was, right? This is in his town. They didn't know who he was, right? And so he made a deal with them and was like, look, I'm going to guarantee that stadium, right? If I fail to meet the guarantee, I will give you guys not only the remainder, I'll pay you a portion on top of that remainder to make the difference. And then so he has the event, he knows his audience, packs it out, sells out the event, goes above and beyond, uses some of the money to actually hire a cleaning crew for the stadium, cleans the stadium, right? After all of this, they didn't know who he was when he came in. And now they're like, who is this guy? We got to figure out, how did this even happen? Their minds are blown. Now he's got that stadium in his back pocket and can always have a concert there. And he would strategically just do that in different cities around the country for years until he built this relationship with these stadiums where he doesn't even have to sign to a Live Nation. He did it independently on his own, right? And I when I look at these models, it comes down to people understanding, again, at the center of who they are, they understand themselves so clearly that their audience comes to them and they super serve their audience. They go above and beyond for their audience, and they establish direct communication and a direct relationship with their audience, and I think that pays, that shows.
I noticed that very same mentality when I saw you and Jidenna travel for the promotion for the last album. And
absolutely.
I thought about that very thing. So, you know, for those who don't know, you dropped the album, and and you went on city by city tour of basically album listening parties, but that were basically parties like daytime parties or nighttime. I don't know if you did that both. Ours was kind of in between here in Oakland, but it was a way for the audience to directly engage with you and Jidenna. And it was one of the amazing things to see of how the do-it-yourself mentality was applied to an artist who's actually, you know, quite big, but it takes this kind of independent approach.
Yeah, absolutely, because it resonates, bro. Like it resonates. Like you, at the end of the day, you're like, those are your people, bro. You got to be amongst the people. There's a reason why when you look at Fela, right, and even how he was operating out of Nigeria, there's a reason why he chose to live where he lived and he didn't leave. You know what I mean? Because where his house was located was right in the neighborhood. You know what I mean? He made himself accessible. You got to be there. Like I don't really believe in the top down approach when it comes to these kind of industries. Like bottom up is always something that gives you longevity, right? Grassroots is always something that gives you longevity, because to be honest, when trends change, your listeners are going to change. Different genres are going to be in, different artists, you know, are going to be the talk of the town right now that people are excited about. So that's an inevitable thing, right? And again, that's nature. That's just nature. Nature is going to continue to evolve. But when you have a base that you've always been honoring and making sure that you're in touch with, regardless of where things around you go, and regardless of where you choose to go in your own artistry, you might choose a whole nother style of music, but you're at least taking people with you because you're directly connected with the people, you know? And so for me, I think that that's something that we've tried to navigate with and honor, you know what I mean? And just making sure that we are, we're honoring the people that showed up to honor us, you know? So absolutely.
You mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to kind of touch on. I mean, in the spirit of talking about Fela, for instance, you know, one of the things that people may not realize is that he released his music after the fact. He had worked on those songs over time. They spoke about a certain issue, and then once that issue was recorded and like, you know, crystallized on record, he moved on to the next thing, never performing those songs again. Just fascinating to me.
It was amazing, bro. It was an amazing model, bro. And I think Fela, you know, and you know, it's funny, man. There's so many. The reason Fela affected generations, and everyone wants to like be their own version of a Fela, is because Fela, I think, also realized the power of music, right? In the sense that, like, I think music has a duality, and sound has a duality, right? Like even the name of this we're talking about musical healing. There's a whole other side of the musical healing conversation, right? I think music can be used as a tool for healing. It could also be used as a tool for warfare. You know what I mean? And when I think about Fela, I think about him using music as a weapon, right? Like his mastery of music was not just so I could say I'm a master of music. I know how to direct a 80-piece band and and you know, put like, no, it was so he could actually amplify what he wanted to speak about when it related to society, when it related to politics, when it related to culture, right? And so music as a weapon is something that he embodies. Someone that I like to juxtapose, you know, in terms of music as healing, right, is Marley. You know what I mean? And I think, and granted, Marley did have a side of him, not to take away from him. Marley had a militant side. Marley had a side where he was making music that also felt like it was war music. It was to rile people up. It was to make people no longer be disillusioned, right? But I also think he had another side of him too, where music for him was also a form of healing, right? And like, you know, you look at just I like just look at I think actually Marley was brilliant. And the thing that people don't give enough credit to Marley about is how strategic he looked at music. He looked at music like a scientist, right? Like Marley looked at music like to be honest, like an epidemiologist. He looked at it as like music can be a virus that infects people for good, right? And like at the core of him, he believed that like, yo, music can actually, it can cure evil. It can cure hate. Even really, it can cure racism. You know what I'm saying? Music can drive that, and it can actually be the vessel, almost like literally a virus that brings that into people and kind of cures them from within. And so I think when, as a creative, as an artist, understanding the polarity of sound, the polarity of music, you know, becomes something that you can use it to heal yourself, you can use it to heal your communities, but you can also use it to empower yourself and take action, you know, and empower your community as well.
So, you know, you just talked about how music can be, you know, I mentioned how music can be a reflection in the way that Fela kind of talked about certain social economic issues. Then you talked about weaponizing that music and then ultimately using it as some sort of messaging and that would heal, right? I mean, I think of that sequence when, and it reminds me of having conversations with young people in West Africa when the music changed. This may be a little bit in the weeds for some people who aren't familiar with the transitions that Afrobeats has gone through, but without going too far into it, ultimately the speeds went way down at some point, and they got really slow. You as a DJ, I'm sure you were, you know.
Oh, absolutely. We
all
all know
were
that
like, what happened?
103 BPMs, yep.
It went from like high, like we're dancing, we're sweating, to like now we're like, you know, two-stepping.
Absolutely.
And I couldn't understand why that happened. And then having conversations around that time with people in Ghana, for instance, which was kind of the pioneer of this pom-pom sound that, you know, Techno, DeVito, Mr. Easy, and all these other artists kind of ended up capitalizing on. You know, it was pointed out to me that, like, you know, when that high BPM stuff was happening, we were like having a great time. The economy was doing great. You know, Ghana had just kind of discovered oil off the coast. And then now we're in a recession and nobody has money to go to the club.
Wow, right what you want. You be knowing, bro. Absolutely.
Ultimately, I think this is kind of, you know, brings us to this moment where here we are at a crossroad yet again. And then, you know, I heard a song by Doja Cat yesterday and I was like, wow, this record would have banged in the club. But there's no club right now. So what is music for you gonna look like, or what do you think it's gonna look like for other artists moving forward? And what's that gonna reflect? What feelings and emotions are they gonna reflect?
Music is always a reflection of society and the times, right? Like that's just they're completely linked, right? You know, when you look at, I'm glad you really brought that up. It reminds me of you know, in the you know, when you have the civil rights movements, right? And you have these movements that were happening and how it shifted sound, how it shifted music, you know, and like you had a whole generation that was listening to Motown, right? And listening to love songs on the radio, and a lot of it was pop, you know, and then eventually the music started shifting, giving way to stacks, right? And soul music took off in a different kind of way because people needed to be fed differently. Their spirit needed to be fed differently because the times called for it. You know what I mean? And music literally shifted because of what was going on at the time, you know? And, you know, I remember being, you know, down in Ferguson, right? You know, peace upon, you know, Mike Brown, you know, and I remember going down there and just, you know, feeling compelled to just like, I gotta be here and support. And I remember I was there for like, you know, over a week, and it was some of the craziest stuff I've ever seen in America. It didn't feel like I was in America, actually, because there were definitely, the thing about Ferguson is by day, it looked like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, right? Suburb, outside of St. Louis, calm, quiet, blah, blah, blah. Literally by day, even when I was there, it kind of looked and felt like that. By night, tanks, cruising the streets, checkpoints where you just show your ID. It was literally, I mean, I found myself in like war room style meetings where they're coaching you on what to do if the person next to you gets sprayed with tear gas, and like these little Maalox bottles that we would make that would help, you know, take away the sting. Or like being in the churches, the churches there were considered safe zones, right? And they would have, that's where a lot of food was and a lot of the water was. And the police would come in and storm the churches, which were considered off limits, take the food and the water and dump the food and the water on the church steps. Like it didn't feel like America, bro. Yeah. Right? And I remember just being down there and like being like marching every day. And they got really good at like crowd control, right? Like, you know, that's when I first learned about LRAD devices, right? Which are, I don't know if people are familiar, it's these devices that were created actually for in war to prevent like riots, where it basically is a device that is directional and it shoots out sound that is like literally like you can't even hear yourself think, right? But the crazy thing is that it's set up and built in such a way that if you're standing right behind it, as if you're operating it, it's quiet. and you can have a casual conversation right behind it, right? And but these were now being used and turned around onto America's own citizens. And I remember being there and being like, this is war. We at war right now, right? And I remember thinking about, what is this moment going to translate to in terms of the culture, the wider culture, in terms of music? You know, how is this going to shift music? You know, and I remember being down there, and you know, I think around that time, I remember J. Cole doing like a performance on one of the night shows. And he had this a cappella performance, and like he dedicated it. Yeah, that's right. Be free. Thank you for that. And I remember being like, you know what, actually, I think, because for me, I'm always concerned, are we going to drop the ball? Are people going to they're going to look at this moment, they're going to feel away for a moment, and then they're going to go back to just our old ways of being, right? And I remember like that ball didn't get dropped. And then I remember like A Seat at the Table came out. And then I remember Kendrick dropped. And all these different things were starting to happen. I was like, oh, okay, great. Like, this is where we're at. We're seeing right now in real time that same shift that we saw, you know, from Motown to Stax. And now I think in this era, we're in the next evolution of that, right? Like, what in terms of what music now, I think is going to give way to, is going to give way to people that it doesn't have to specifically be about, hey, this is what we're doing now, and this is how we get out of this situation. Like, it's not, I don't think it's even literal. I think what people are looking for right now is a sense of direction. I think people are looking for healing. I think people are looking for freedom. You know what I mean? Like, even the idea of just being claustrophobic and being on the house all day, people are looking for the ability to just be free and feel alive and feel unencumbered. You know what I mean? And so I think music that kind of allows people to do that. And whether it's for escapism or whether it's for empowerment, all of them have their role. But if it's not giving people that ability to be able to deal with the times, then I think you're going to see a shift, and some of that might wane, you know, and give way to things that are actually giving people direction.
As a producer, you know, did you find yourself in the situation that we're in, being, you know, confined in our homes, instantly motivated? Or were you, you know, going back to the beginning of this conversation, did you pause? Did you reflect? Did you find yourself, I wasn't motivated? I'm gonna, you know, be the first one to admit, I wasn't motivated for the first week or two, really. And like, it really has taken me weeks for me to find that motivation to do something. And then once we find that motivation, are you overwhelmed? So like, I guess what I'm asking is, where in the process are you currently? And like, you know, what were your five stages of grievance or whatever?
Right. No, definitely. You know, it's crazy. Like leading into this moment, you know, I was actually in South Africa for the month of February, and you know, I in terms of musically and creatively, where I was in a chapter of I was free, bro. I was free. I was like, you know me, I'm always digging and looking for different corners, you know. So I found a corner of like psychedelic funk music from West Africa. Like, but it wasn't regular funk. It was like it was psychedelic. It was trippy. It was like it was like, imagine being in Ghana in 1969 on shrooms or something like that. Like, it was like some other
music today.
Huh?
This is a new band today, or are you listening
to? No. This is me going back. This is me going back.
We gotta trade.
Yeah. But don't worry, new is coming. But you know, so that point being, I was listening to a lot of music that was it was liberating. You know, it reminded me of what I loved about you know, our record, Pretty and Afraid, right? Which for me, you know, every time I hear that record, it's the most free, not even just in that album, in general, in that chapter of my life, that I feel like I've ever felt. You know what I mean? Like, it represented that just didn't feel like there were any boundaries. And so that's where I was kind of coming into, you know, this chapter. And I think, you know, when I came back to, you know, stateside, same similar to you. Like, I didn't feel crazy inspired. I didn't feel crazy, and I didn't feel the need to also, though. Right? Like, I feel like we as artists, sometimes we're so critical of ourselves to always be putting out inspiring shit. You know what I'm saying? And but to be honest, like, not that for me in my own personal life, especially because I'm always driven by this idea of African excellence, which has been drilled into me by my father. I'm always being hard on myself when it comes to that. What's your output right now? What are you doing? What are you contributing to the world? Are you the greatest right now? Da-da-da. And you wind up, that's a side of you, but I've had to liberate myself from that side of myself, because the beauty of it is that you realize when you're actually not a slave to that mentality of always having to be inspired and put stuff out that's resonating, is that there's something to be learned and gained that can actually be the thing that gives you the creativity that you need. Right. And so for me, again, it came down to adaptation. I was like, man, I don't love my ideas right now, so I'm not going to force it. You know, the younger me used to try to force. The older me is like, on some, let me finesse it then. Okay, cool. Let me take this moment and find another way to be involved in the conversation. And what I've been doing recently is just using my voice, just speaking out. You know what I mean? Which is something that I've actually felt like I've been not doing enough of. And now this chapter, this season is like, yeah, you haven't been honoring this side of yourself. We're going to force you to talk, get on this panel, get on Toast and Light, get out here. You know what I'm saying? And literally, and that's going to be my contribution right now. And I've realized that the more that I embrace that, I actually feel like I'm getting enough input in these conversations, in these interactions, where it's actually pushing me back to the studio now. And I'm like, man, I actually needed that conversation. That was cyclical. Now I want to go make some records right now, you know? And so I think that's the beauty sometimes is like, we always sometimes feel like we need to chase, right? But sometimes it's actually the building. It's the building within. It's the building within the individuals that we're given, you know, in our networks, in our communities, that actually wind up being the thing that we were ultimately trying to chase, you know, at the beginning. So just embracing it.
I think that's a great point to sort of bring this conversation full circle, and that just embracing that moment, and being honest with yourself and really feeling like it's okay. I think that's part of the healing, right? I mean, to be honest with yourself, I think is a huge part of it. I did want to touch on two things. One is that, and these are more kind of like tangible, like what are your thoughts, your predictions about what music is gonna literally sound like? I'll give you, I hate to call out anybody, but
yeah,
the target, Drake's Tootsie, like to me felt out of place.
Yeah.
I'm trying to hate. It just felt like it was a long time. Like it literally would have came out 3 weeks before when we were still at the club doing some footwork.
Right. Absolutely.
But now like it felt like it just didn't feel like the right song at the right moment.
Yeah.
What do you think is music gonna literally sound like in 6 months? And then two, that'll lead us into a question of like what you've been listening to sort of, cultivate that healing within yourself. So what artists have been inspiring you? What music is inspiring? So just it's a 2-part question.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna get as specific as to say the genre or the sound. I will say anything that feels. I'll tell you what's not gonna work, in my opinion, is anything that feels just tone deaf. You know what I mean? And tone deaf, like I said, like it doesn't mean that you have to be literal about the times. Like it just means that you have to be aware of the times and have an offering that people are going to be receptive to. Right. And so I think anyone that's playing that game of let me acknowledge this moment, let me not live in denial of it, let me not live like, this doesn't really, it's not, the only issue is now I just got to put on a mask. Like when you acknowledge the times, that's what's going to be what cuts through and I think with people, and so, and I think any music that again gives people just the feeling of connectedness too, right? Like, I think even when I'm looking at the Tootsie, actually that video is really, and the timing of that is really interesting, right? Because I think Buddy just moved into his crib, right? And you get this massive crib and everyone's social distancing. And so no one's in it. And it's a man doing a dance in this big crib by what feels like a big hotel by himself.
But that is kind
of all these, fireworks go off in the background, And so it's like most people are not living like that. Most people are thinking about how do I hold on to my house? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do I hold on to my house? How do I hold on to my job? People are just they're mentally just in a different place. And again, it does, there are times in which it serves its purpose, right? Like dance is a form of expression that makes people feel free, right? And so the other side of that coin is like, I need something to dance to right now. What's the steps? Right foot, left, where, up, what? Okay, and boom, you learn. You know, so again, I think it's to each his own, and not to try to stratify different kinds of music, but I think it's, are you playing your role? You know, are you playing your role in these times?
Well, man, I appreciate the thoughts on everything that we've touched on.
Oh, what am I listening to?
Yeah, and so that leads me to the last question. Then we can open it up to some Q&A.
Bruh,
What are you listening to? I'll tell you what I've been listening to, but you got to tell me.
Listening to?
Well, what I've been listening to, honestly, like I said, I was digging into these old records.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I've been wanting to catch up on has been on my rotation. So, my mind always goes back. I've been listening to a lot of East African music. I've been listening to also just like some, like when I feel the angst, I'm not gonna lie, like my favorite has been like West Side Gun and Griselda and all that stuff. To me, like those are two extremes. So I'll be listening to pretty like East African, like Congolese influenced jazz.
Right.
And then, and then you have West Side shooting me in the ear literally every 3 seconds.
I love it. You need that yin and that yang, bro. You need that. We're dynamic people. We need that.
I've been happy. What about you? What have you been listening to?
I've actually been listening to a lot of, so I've been continuing listening to just alternative, weird West African psychedelic. Because I think psychedelic music is interesting because, you know, even in this era, you know, you have different non-Black artists that are making psychedelic music that generations of this time are like, oh man, yeah, these are the guys that make psychedelic music, right? And it's like, and psychedelic music, we forget, is often people of color. And so I've been actually just studying psychedelic music throughout the diaspora, right? Like Peruvian psychedelic music, right? Which I've been really heavy into.
Is it like the cumbia
chicha?
stuff?
Oh, I love it. Yes, exactly. Like so the roots of chicha, huh?
I'm a big fan. I love that stuff.
Yeah, amazing, incredible. So I'm studying that. I've been in, you know, even in South Africa, I was finding some South African psychedelic artists. Mm-hmm. Again, a couple pockets of Ghanaian. I'm not gonna reveal names yet because I'm still.
No, that's fine.
You know but
I'm gonna hit you up there.
Exactly. I got you. And so that's been one side of it, and that's what's kind of been giving me the like freedom, where I'm just like, man, I feel great. I feel actually amazing. You know, and I think another thing that I've also been listening to is a lot of rockers music and rock steady. Mm-hmm. A lot of like Alton Ellis, a lot of Biddy McLean. Mm-hmm. And then there's this one record that I've been listening to a lot, man. It's called King in My Empire. It's more dub actually. But it's like a trance. And the beauty of that, it's like a 5-6 minute long record. But the beauty of it is you know, the main line is about being a king in your own empire, right? And the reason for me that's resonating right now is it's reminding me that we all have, in a time period where we're surrounded by uncertainty, right? There's a wisdom to be found in anxiety. There's a wisdom to be found in uncertainty. There's something there to be found, right? And I think that now employs your own ability to have agency over your life, right? And so it's the idea of how do you actually assume the seat, assume the throne in your own empire. And so when I hear that, for me, I'm just like, that's the fuel I need right now, yo. That's the fuel I need. So yeah, that's probably what I'm listening to most. And just, you know, there's something healing about rockers music, bro. Like, have you ever seen two people like argue, like with rockers music on in the background, bro? You know what I'm saying? Like, as an experiment, like, yo, like go try to talk to your girl and have an argument with your girl, but be playing like Alton Ellis in the background. She's gonna be looking at you like you don't really match.
I'm gonna use that trick every time I'm getting in trouble for something.
There you go.
Yo, I appreciate you so much, man.
Likewise, bro.
Talking forever, and honestly, like, I really do look forward to seeing you in person one day soon.
Absolutely, inshallah.
Just kind of continue, you know, reasoning and chopping up ideas with you, man. So
bless, absolute, man. Indeed, soon come.
Yeah, man. I think Toasted Life wanted to sort of address some questions from the audience. I touched on some of the things that had been written already to us beforehand. And someone asked about Sade. I don't know if that you want to. You said you were gonna say something. You're gonna say something about Sade earlier, but
Bruh, so there's just certain people that just got it, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like with every woman that I've ever been with, I've made it clear that the only person I would ever leave them for or cheat on them for in advance. This is me telling you in advance. Is Sade. I don't like. There's something about the spirit of Sade. I don't even want to get too far deep into it, but she just opens up a portal that I think that if every man on earth, like when you know what, when men's energy just ain't right and they just imbalance, just cut on Sade as a social experiment, and I just like to see what that does to if your energy's off. You know, it's just something that she cuts through. She just cuts through, bro. And that's not no trendy, like I know it became trendy at the time to love Sade, but my dad was playing Sade when I was a kid. You know what I'm saying? So I've always loved her music.
Yeah, man. Likewise, I'm a huge fan. I think for me, Sade has always, and it's such a weird question, random question to bring up, and artist to bring up, but I think a lot of people are just, feel really passionately about her. Mm-hmm. For me, it's always been about the idea of how vulnerable I feel through her lyrics. When I sing.
Oh, absolutely, bro. Sade has you in your feelings, bro.
Really does.
Sade's dangerous, bro. It's like taking, bro. I'm telling you, bro. It's like taking MDMA, bro, or something like that, bro. It's like she just opens up sides of you where you're like, man, I didn't know I could feel this emotion.
I love it, man. We have a few people in the chat that if you want to ask a question in the last few moments that we have left, feel free to hit us in the chat. There was a couple questions in here about I'm trying to read over here on the fly. What are some other things that you're doing to heal as a creative in this moment? So I'm gonna pass that one to you.
I think establishing my diet, like I was saying, bro, right? Like what are the things that I'm putting into myself? What are the things that I'm reading? And just taking ownership of it. You know what I mean? Like I just moved into a new crib here in the A, and my library of books that I haven't seen in actually for 2 years or so, 2-3 years, because I don't think I even unpacked them in my last crib. Mm-hmm. I just haven't even witnessed my library, you know what I mean? And so literally the other day I just unpacked like 10 boxes of books, that I just haven't seen in a while. Books that actually like have been a part of my journey, you know what I mean? And so literally just unboxing them, finding books that I've had in my collection that I've been intending to read, and just laying them around my room, and waking up every day and picking up something, from that. So a lot of just intentional reading. I've been meditating a lot. I've been breaking out the little Tibetan singing bowls. I've been burning my Pali Sali, Palo Santo. You know what I'm saying? I've been doing all the little cliche millennial things that that we do.
That's how we, how we
but it's been great. It's been great. It's been amazing. I've been taking baths. That's the secret. Baths with a ton of lavender Epsom salt it'll change you, bro. But for hours. Like my bath ritual is incredible. In fact, I feel like I should make like a YouTube tutorial on the right way to have a bath. It's like a ritual, bro. It's a ritual.
My tub isn't the most conducive for a enjoyable bathing experience. It's like it's very functional. It's like very practical.
Understood.
I need to get up on that.
Understood. There's ways though. People be using that. Like you gotta buy the little foot bath, John. Even that'll change your life. You know what I'm saying? The little foot bath. The little foot bath.
This is a personal question for me, and I always bring it back to the music because for me, I'm always thinking about what am I gonna program next? Are you hearing anybody right now within your peer circle that you're excited about? I'll give you some examples. For me, like I know SARS for in the Afro pop space is coming out with some new music. He's getting ready to drop an album that I think is that people should be looking out for. I think someone like who's the brother who just did the remix for Lenu, Buju from Nigeria.
Oh, Buju, yeah.
The remix with, and then
the burner remix,
yeah, the burner remix, and then all the Amapiano stuff coming out of South Africa, obviously.
Yeah, to be honest, that's probably what I'm most excited about. From the continent, even just being down there, bro, and hanging out with Moonchild Sinelli and Busiswa. I mean, you know, so they were just putting us on to different scenes and taking us different places. And it's just, for me, it feels like the most creative thing coming out of the continent right now, because it's, you know, one, as we know, it comes out, you know, of these townships, but it's these kids, bro. It's these kids that are like 17 years old that are like, they're not afraid to experiment. You know what I mean? Like, and actually for me, I think, you know, West African music, sometimes we get comfortable, you know what I mean? We get comfortable, and I think in West African music now, we're starting to see, you know, like, you know, with over the past year or two, actually, the Alte movement that's like, you know what, I'm going to actually experiment too now, you know what I'm saying, push the boundaries. And so for me, you know, Alte and you know, in West, and then also I think I'm a Piano in South has been super, super inspiring for me, because they're just not playing by rules. They're making new rules. It's like, but they're informed by the rules. It's not like people that just throwing reverb on everything and just trying to sound like, nah, it's like, you could tell they've studied, but then they're also like, okay, nah, I'm gonna now flip this on its head and do something else, you know? So.
The last, I mean, I know I've been trying to kind of bring closure to this conversation, but this is the last thing I kind of want to touch about. What do you think about the accessibility that artists are having now? Like, you're able to kind of, I've seen people literally, like, I've had people call and be like, I just talked to Malik Berry, or I just talked to you know, Burna Boy through the live. And I'm like, oh, they were like, it's, you know, they're like, just, they're super fans. But now having a direct line to the artist, and the artists are making themselves accessible like never before. Do you think that's going to continue? And what do you think how that's going to affect your craft and the craft of your peers?
I just think it depends on the kind of artist you are. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like I think there are some artists that are going to gain from direct interaction with crowds, but I also believe the opposite is true, right? Like, you know, I think that artists that also maintain a certain level of mystique or distance, sometimes there's also a place for that. Like, if Sade got on live right now, I'd be like, I'd probably try to DM her and be like, yo, save that.
Yes,
save that for me. Save that for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just depends. It depends on the kind of artist that you are. You know what I mean? But again, I think it presents an opportunity to embrace it. And for some, you know, I think it makes sense to just, you know, be what you are. So.
I love it, man.
My man Warren came back.
Hey, I'm back in the building. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never left. Yo, yeah, man. You know, this was a phenomenal conversation. Just thank you guys so much. I see you on with the Martell. Yeah, where your glass at? Okay, where them bottles?
Never too far. It's never too far.
You're a little more sophisticated than I do.
But the glass?
I dive in, man. You got from the aesthetics to just your sipping portion, like mine, I just kind of went in. But
there's a virtual background, so ignore this. That ain't.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. You comfy in Atlanta over there. We know.
Yeah.
Man, but yeah, man, thanks again for everything. You know, again, thanks to our partner Martell for you know, for helping us make this come to life, and for always, you know, their support in general. But yeah, man, I think this is like super, super helpful as a creative myself, like, you know, just understanding just that healing journey and what's required to go within, so that, you know, work is always going to be there, but, you know, you can't really be your most productive, most efficient self if you're not taking care of home within yourself. So yeah, I appreciate the words. I appreciate the wisdom and the insight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the YouTube link into this chat here for those that, if y'all want to share this with any of your friends or people that you think could really benefit from a conversation like this, please share that and pass that around for us. And yeah, like I said, there's going to be a survey that pops up at the end. So yeah, if you don't mind, please fill that out so we can continue to improve. And yeah, we have another chat next Thursday, Founders Mentality with Brandon Bryant, investor and entrepreneur, and Mandela Dixon, founder of Founders Gym, helping you get your mind right. So to help you level up. So it's going to be a really, really good chat. But want to give another fire round of applause and appreciation for Juan and Nana. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, brothers. Can't wait to see you in person as well. And we can, you know, turn up at the next Toasted Life joint.
Absolutely. I love it, man. Absolutely. Thanks for sending this thing through too. It's going to be a long night. I'll tell you that.
Drink responsibly.
Absolutely.
All right, y'all.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you.
All right,
Peace.
bless y'all. Be well.
All right.
All right, y'all.